Hello dreamers, and welcome back to Hafee Sleep. Tonight, we drift among the quiet wonders of our universe, where the moon's gentle pull stirs oceans, shapes shores, and guides the very rhythm of our planet. But before we sink deeper into the tide's lullaby, if these whispers of the cosmos calm your mind, I'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe. Each click weaves you into our constellation of listeners, helping us share more stories like this across the silent night. And if tonight's journey soothes you, let us know with a like. It's a tiny ripple that tells us we're drifting together. Now, wherever you are, curled under city lights, nestled in mountain quiet, or listening beside the sea, tell us in the comments. Let's map our shared stillness across this spinning world. Now, breathe deeply, let go, and let the tides carry us. Picture this. You're standing on a wide, sandy beach, the smell of salt thick in the air, the cries of gulls echoing overhead. The waves are lapping gently at your toes. You build a magnificent sandcastle right at the water's edge, complete with moat and seashell battlements. You come back a few hours later, and it's gone, washed away. But come back a few hours after that, and the beach where your castle stood is now high and dry, maybe even littered with stranded seaweed and curious little crabs exploring the newly exposed sand. What's happening here? It's not the wind suddenly changing its mind. It's not the ocean deciding to take a breather. This grand rhythmic breathing of the ocean, the rise and fall we call the tides, is all thanks to our silent celestial neighbor, the moon, performing an ancient, invisible dance with our planet. It's a dance of gravity, a cosmic tug-of-war played out across 250,000 miles, and its effects ripple across every coastline on Earth. Buckle up, because we're about to dive deep into the how and why of this mesmerizing phenomenon, unraveling every little detail of this watery ballet orchestrated by the moonlight. Now, to understand this, we need to talk about gravity. Don't worry, we won't get lost in complex equations. Think of gravity as a giant invisible hand. Every single thing that has mass, that is, stuff, has gravity. The bigger the thing, the stronger its gravitational pull. You have gravity. Right now, you're pulling the Earth towards you with your own tiny gravitational force. Of course, the Earth is so much bigger and heavier than you are, so its pull is vastly stronger, which is why you stay firmly planted on the ground and not floating off into space. The moon, though much smaller than Earth, about 1/80th the mass, is still a significant chunk of rock orbiting relatively close to us. And just like the Earth pulls on the moon, keeping it in orbit, the moon pulls back on the Earth. It's a mutual attraction, a constant gravitational handshake across the void. But here's the crucial bit. Gravity isn't just a force that acts at the center of objects. It pulls on every part of an object. And crucially, the strength of that pull depends on distance. The closer you are to something, the stronger its gravitational tug on you. The farther away you are, the weaker that pull becomes. This difference in pull over a distance is what we call a tidal force. It's this subtle difference, this variation in gravity's strength, that's the secret sauce for tides, not just the overall pull itself. Imagine the Earth as a big watery ball facing the moon. The side of the Earth closest to the moon feels the moon's gravity the strongest. Why? Because it's closest. This strong pull acts on the ocean water, effectively trying to pull it towards the moon. But it's not just pulling the water, it's pulling the solid Earth too. However, the solid Earth is rigid. It doesn't flow easily like water does. So the water, being fluid and mobile, responds more readily. It gets pulled towards the moon, bulging out slightly in that direction. Think of it like the moon giving the ocean on its side a gentle, persistent hug. Now, what about the side of the Earth facing away from the moon? It's the farthest point. Here, the moon's gravity is weakest. But remember, the Earth and moon are orbiting around a common point called the barycenter, which is actually located inside the Earth, since Earth is so much heavier. But that's a detail for later. This orbital motion creates a kind of centrifugal force, like the force that pushes you to the side of a car when it turns sharply. On the side away from the moon, this centrifugal force pushing outwards, away from the center of the orbit, is actually stronger than the relatively weak gravitational pull of the moon back inwards. The result? The water on the far side also bulges outwards, away from the moon. It's like the water is getting flung out slightly by the spin of the Earth-Moon system. So, we have two bulges in the ocean. One directly under the moon, caused by the moon's gravity pulling the water towards it, and one directly opposite on the far side of the Earth, caused by the centrifugal force of the orbital motion exceeding the moon's weaker gravitational pull there. These bulges aren't enormous mountains of water. In the open ocean, the difference might only be a foot or two. But over the vast expanse of the ocean, this represents a huge volume of water being shifted. Now, the Earth isn't standing still. It's constantly rotating on its axis, spinning like a top once every 24 hours. Imagine our watery Earth spinning underneath these two relatively fixed bulges of water. The bulges always point roughly towards and away from the moon as it orbits. As a particular point on the Earth's surface, say your favorite beach, rotates into one of these bulges, the ocean water deepens. The tide comes in. That's high tide. As that point rotates out of the bulge and into the troughs between the bulges, the water level drops. The tide goes out. That's low tide. Because there are two bulges, most places on Earth experience two high tides and two low tides roughly every 24 hours and 50 minutes. Why the extra 50 minutes? Because while the Earth is spinning, the moon is also slowly orbiting around the Earth, moving eastward in its orbit. It takes the Earth about 24 hours to spin once relative to the Sun, a solar day, but it takes about 24 hours and 50 minutes to spin once relative to the Moon, a lunar day, and bring the same point back directly under the Moon again. So, the tidal cycle shifts later each day by about 50 minutes. But hold on, it's not quite that simple. The Earth isn't just a smooth ball covered entirely by a uniform ocean. We have continents, big bulky land masses that get in the way. Imagine those tidal bulges sweeping across the globe. When they hit a continent, they can't just flow freely over it. In the vast, deep, open ocean, miles above the abyssal plains, they move relatively freely. The water is deep, the path is wide open. Here, the tidal range, the difference between the crest, high tide, and the trough, low tide, of this passing wave, is modest, maybe just a foot or two, like a barely noticeable swell on a calm day. A sailor in the middle of the Pacific might not even register the tide change without careful instruments. It's the cosmic signal in its purest, least distorted form. But now, picture this bulge approaching the eastern seaboard of North America. Instead of open ocean, it smacks into the brick wall of the continent. The water can't just flow over it. Land is stubborn. So what happens? The energy in that tidal bulge doesn't vanish. It has to go somewhere. It's like trying to push a large, slow-moving crowd through a narrow doorway. The crowd, the water, gets squeezed, redirected, and its energy gets concentrated. This is where the shape of the coastline becomes the star director of the local tidal drama. Think of the coastline as the mouth of a giant funnel, megaphone, or sometimes a baffle. Imagine a wide, shallow bay that gets progressively narrower and shallower as you move inland. The classic example? The Bay of Fundy, nestled between New Brunswick and Nova Scotia in Canada. As our incoming tidal bulge approaches the wide mouth of the bay, it starts to feel the seafloor rising beneath it, the continental shelf. These shallowing forces the water to pile up vertically because it can't spread out sideways as easily. Imagine a wave slowing down and growing taller as it approaches a beach, but on a massive scale. As the bulge surges into the bay itself, the sides pinch in dramatically. The water has nowhere to go but up. The energy of the entire incoming tide is compressed into a smaller and smaller volume. The result? The tidal range amplifies monstrously. High tide isn't just a foot higher, it can be 50 feet, 15 meters, or more above low tide. That's the height of a 5-story building. Picture entire harbors emptying and filling twice a day, exposing vast mudflats teeming with life one moment and submerging wharves the next. The water doesn't just rise, it races in and out with powerful currents called tidal bores, sometimes even forming a visible wall of water rushing upstream in rivers feeding the bay. It's not magic, it is physics, concentrating the moon's gentle nudge into a spectacular show thanks to a perfectly shaped rocky funnel. Another fun example, the Bristol Channel, Severn Estuary in the UK. Its funnel shape amplifies the tide significantly, creating the famous Severn Bore, a tidal wave that surfers actually ride upstream. The resonant chamber, natural frequency. Some bodies of water aren't just funnels. They're like giant bathtubs or wine glasses with a specific sloshing speed. If the natural rhythm at which water wants to slosh back and forth in a bay or gulf matches the rhythm of the incoming tidal push, roughly 12 hours and 25 minutes for the main lunar tide, something incredible happens. Resonance. The tidal energy gets pumped in at just the right moment to reinforce the slosh, making each oscillation bigger and bigger. The Bay of Fundy is also a champion resonator. Its length and depth are almost perfectly tuned to the tidal period, so the water sloshes back and forth like water in a huge, slow-motion rocking bathtub, amplifying the tidal range far beyond what funneling alone would achieve. It's like pushing a child on a swing at exactly the right moment each time. They go higher and higher, disrupt the shape or depth, and the resonance fades. The baffled basin, dampening reflection. Now, imagine the opposite scenario. Think of the Mediterranean Sea. It's almost entirely enclosed, connected to the Atlantic only by the relatively narrow Strait of Gibraltar. When the Atlantic tidal bulge tries to push water into the Med through this narrow gate, it's like trying to fill a vast swimming pool with a garden hose, incredibly slow and inefficient. Much of the tidal energy gets reflected back at the strait, or dissipated as friction within the basin before it can build up significantly. Plus, the Mediterranean itself is deep and complex, lacking the broad, shallow shelves that amplify tides. The result? Most Mediterranean coasts experience very modest tidal ranges, often less than a foot. Locals might barely notice the tide change. Similarly, large, deep, semi-enclosed seas like the Gulf of Mexico also have relatively small tides, generally 1 to 3 feet, though local geography can cause variations. The continents and narrow connections act like baffles, muffling the cosmic drumbeat. Coastlines aren't smooth walls. They're riddled with headlands, islands, peninsulas, estuaries, rivers, and intricate networks of channels. As the tidal bulge approaches, the water doesn't hit a single barrier. It gets split, diverted, and channeled. Think of it like rainwater hitting a complex mountainside. It finds gullies, canyons, and valleys to flow through. Water surging into a broad bay might get focused into a narrow inlet between two headlands, accelerating into a powerful tidal current. An island chain can act like a sieve, diffusing the tide's energy or creating complex eddies and countercurrents behind them. Rivers meeting the sea become conduits for the tide, which can push salt water many miles upstream during high tide, a tidal river, creating unique ecosystems. The famous tidal reach of the Amazon is called the Pororoca, a powerful tidal bore. The Coriolis effect. Remember, the Earth is spinning. This deflects moving water, to the right in the northern hemisphere, left in the southern. In large ocean basins or wide continental shelves, this deflection shapes how the tidal bulge actually rotates around a central point, an amphidromic system, rather than just sloshing straight in and out. Near coasts, it influences the direction and strength of tidal currents, making them flood and ebb along different paths in complex ways. It's like the coastline maze has its own built-in spin that twists the tidal flows. The depth of water near the coast, particularly the continental shelf, is a massive amplifier. Deep ocean water can rise and fall with minimal horizontal movement. But when that tidal bulge hits the gently sloping continental shelf, which can extend hundreds of miles offshore but be only a few hundred feet deep, things change dramatically. The shallower water forces the bulge to slow down and, crucially, to grow much taller, to move the same volume of water. It's the same principle as waves growing taller as they approach the beach. The broad, shallow shelf acts like a giant amplifier stage before the tide even reaches the intricate coastline maze. The wider and shallower the shelf, the bigger the potential amplification. Eastern North America and Northern Europe have broad shelves, contributing to their larger tides compared to steep Pacific coasts. This messy interaction with continents isn't just academic. It shapes everything. Navigation. A ship captain needs precise local tide tables. Running aground at low tide in a place like the Bay of Fundy is disastrous. Knowing when high tide clears a sandbar is crucial for entering harbors worldwide. Coastal life. The intertidal zone, that area exposed at low tide and submerged at high tide, is defined by the tidal range. A 50-foot range in Fundy creates vast, rich mudflats. A 1-foot range in the Med creates a tiny strip. This dictates what plants and animals thrive there. Mussels, barnacles, crabs, sea stars, all are masters of timing their lives to the local tidal rhythm. Engineering. Building ports, bridges, seawalls, or offshore structures demands intimate knowledge of local tidal extremes and currents. Ignoring them leads to flooded cities, undermined foundations, or destroyed infrastructure. Think of Venice battling acqua alta, high water exacerbated by tides, wind, and sinking land. Energy. Tidal power plants rely on capturing the energy of these amplified, funneled currents. They only make economic sense in places with large ranges or very strong currents generated by coastal constrictions. The weird tides. Some places have peculiar tidal patterns because of all these factors. Southampton, England famously experiences a double high tide, a prolonged high water stand, due to complex interactions of tidal waves coming around both ends of the Isle of Wight. Nantucket Island can have significantly different tide times and heights on its north and south shores, mere miles apart. It's all down to the local coastal plumbing, So, while the moon and sun provide the fundamental rhythm, the steady drumbeat from space, it's the continents, with their jagged coastlines, shallow shelves, and enclosed basins, that act as the planet's sound system. They take that cosmic signal and crank it up to 11 in some places, Fundy, muffle it to a whisper in others, Mediterranean, and create a complex, ever-shifting symphony of currents, heights, and timings everywhere else. The next time you see a tide chart for your favorite beach, remember, it's not just a simple reflection of the moon's position. It's the meticulously calculated result of how that moon-driven bulge navigates a truly epic obstacle course of rock, shaped by millions of years of geology, filtered through shallow seas, squeezed by narrow inlets, and twisted by the Earth's spin. It's the grand celestial dance, masterfully choreographed by gravity, but performed on a stage built by continents, making every coastline a unique and dynamic front-row seat to the greatest show on and off Earth. Now, you might be wondering, what about the sun? Surely that giant ball of fire has some say in this watery dance? Absolutely. You are spot on. The sun is vastly more massive than the moon. Its gravitational pull on Earth is about 180 times stronger than the moon's pull. So why isn't the sun the main tide generator? The sun absolutely has a voice in this aquatic symphony. It's not just a silent spectator. It's the conductor subtly adjusting the volume knobs on the moon's rhythm section. But its role is fascinatingly counterintuitive, a brilliant demonstration of why distance is the true king of tidal influence. Strap in, because we're about to unravel why the sun, despite its staggering power, plays second fiddle to the moon in the tide-generating band, yet remains the essential maestro of the tidal intensity. Picture the sun. It's mind-bogglingly huge. You could fit about 1.3 million Earths inside it. Its gravitational pull is the mighty hand that keeps our entire planet and everything on it whipping around in orbit at 67,000 miles per hour. Compared to the sun, the moon is a cosmic pebble, only about 1/80th the mass of Earth itself. The sun's raw gravitational yank on Earth, it's roughly 180 times stronger than the moon's pull. 180 times! Based on pure muscle, you'd think the sun would be the undisputed heavyweight champion of tides, sloshing our oceans around like a toddler in a bathtub. But here's the cosmic twist, the secret sauce we discovered earlier. Tides aren't about the average pull. They're about the difference in pull across the Earth. That difference is the tidal force. And tidal force doesn't just weaken with distance. It weakens dramatically, specifically with the cube of the distance. Let's break that down without the scary math. Double the distance. The tidal force becomes 8 times weaker. Triple the distance. It plummets to 27 times weaker. The sun is about 390 times farther away from Earth than the moon is. Plug that in. 390 multiply by 390, and then again by 390. That's a staggering number, roughly 59 million. While the sun's overall gravitational pull is 180 times stronger than the moon's, its tidal force, the crucial difference maker, is about 59 million times weaker than it would be if the sun were as close as the moon. Ouch. Do the final comparison. The sun's massive gravity advantage, 180x stronger, gets utterly crushed by its distance disadvantage, effectively making its tidal force 59 million times weaker per unit mass at the moon's distance. The result? The sun's tidal force on Earth is actually only about half as strong as the moon's. Think of it like this. The moon is like a small but incredibly enthusiastic child standing right next to a large, flexible trampoline. They jump up and down energetically right near the edge. Their individual jumps aren't huge, but because they're so close, they create a very noticeable localized dip and rise in the fabric, right where they are, and a corresponding smaller bulge on the opposite side due to the stretch. They have an outsized effect on the trampoline's shape right near them. The sun is like a sumo wrestler standing way, way off to the side of the same trampoline. He's immensely powerful. If he were standing close, one stomp would send shockwaves everywhere. But because he's so far away, when he stomps his foot, the entire trampoline dips very slightly and uniformly towards him. There's almost no difference in the dip between the side closest to him and the side farthest away. The fabric stretches so minimally across its width that you barely notice any local bulging. His immense power is diluted by the vast distance. So, the moon, our nimble neighbor, wins the tide-generating contest not by brute strength, but by proximity. Its gravitational nudges create a much steeper gradient across Earth's diameter. The sun, the powerful but distant uncle, exerts a much more uniform pull. Its tidal effect is real, but gentler, broader, and less locally dramatic than the moon's. But don't think the sun just sulks in the corner. While it might not be the lead guitarist, it's absolutely the keyboard player who controls the volume and adds rich layers of harmony. It doesn't create its own independent tidal rhythm. Instead, it modifies the rhythm set by the moon. Think of the moon's tidal bulges as the baseline beat. The sun comes in and either cranks up the bass and treble or mellows everything out, depending on where it stands relative to the moon and Earth. This modulation happens because the sun's tidal bulge, though weaker, is always present. Its effect depends entirely on whether its bulge aligns with the moon's bulge or works against it. This alignment is dictated by the ever-changing phases of the moon, which are themselves caused by the relative positions of the sun, Earth, and moon. During new moon, moon between sun and Earth, and full moon, Earth between sun and moon, roughly every 2 weeks. In both these configurations, the sun, Earth, and moon are in a straight line, or very nearly so. Picture it. During new moon, the sun and moon are both pulling from roughly the same direction. During full moon, the sun and Earth are on one side, the moon is on the opposite side, but crucially, they are still aligned through the Earth's center. In this lineup, the sun's tidal bulge reinforces the moon's tidal bulge. Imagine the moon creating its usual bulge on the side facing it and the opposite side. Now, the sun adds its own weaker bulge, perfectly aligned with the moon's. On the moon-facing side, both gravity pulls combine, pulling water even more strongly towards the moon-sun line. On the far side, opposite the moon, the sun's tidal force also reinforces the centrifugal wind bulge. Essentially, the sun's bulge piles on top of the moon's bulge in both locations. The result: higher high tides and lower low tides. The difference between high and low water, the tidal range, is at its maximum. The ocean isn't just rising and falling. It's doing so with extra gusto. The high tide springs forth higher than usual, and the low tide retreats further, exposing more seabed. Hence the name spring tide, from the Old English Germanic word springen, meaning to leap up or to burst forth, not the season. Real-world impact. Spring tides are prime time for extreme tidal phenomena. Tidal bores are stronger. Tidal currents run faster, and low tides expose vast areas for clam digging or reveal hidden shipwrecks. They also increase the risk of coastal flooding, especially if they coincide with storm surges driven by low-pressure weather systems or strong onshore winds. If you're planning a beach walk to explore tide pools, check if it's a spring tide, low tide. You'll see the most. Now comes the neap tides. When? During first quarter moon and last quarter moon, roughly halfway between spring tides. Why? At these phases, the moon is at a right angle, 90 degrees to the Sun-Earth line. From Earth's perspective, we see half the moon illuminated. Gravitationally, the sun and moon are pulling from perpendicular directions. The cosmic tug of war. Now, the sun's tidal bulge is completely out of sync with the moon's. The sun is trying to create its own pair of bulges aligned with the Sun-Earth axis, while the moon is creating its bulges along the Moon-Earth axis. Picture it. Where the moon is trying to pull water up to create its high tide bulge, the sun might be pulling water down or sideways to fill its own bulge, and vice versa. Their tidal forces aren't aligned. They're pulling the water in conflicting directions. The result, lower high tides and higher low tides. The tidal range is at its minimum. The conflicting pulls cancel each other out partially. The high tide doesn't climb as high because the sun's influence is pulling some water away from the moon's high tide peak. Conversely, the low tide doesn't fall as low because the sun's influence is adding a bit of lift where the moon's low tide trough would be deepest. The name neap tide likely comes from an Old English word, nep, meaning scant or lacking, perfectly describing this subdued tidal swing. Real-world impact. Neap tides mean less dramatic water level changes. Tidal currents are generally weaker, making it potentially safer for swimming or boating in areas with strong currents during springs. It's a quieter time on the tidal front. For coastal construction or activities needing stable water levels, neaps might be preferable. The sun's influence isn't just a simple on-off switch between springs and neaps. Its modulation adds layers of subtlety. The elliptical orbits. Remember, both the Earth's orbit around the sun and the moon's orbit around Earth are slightly elliptical, not perfect circles. Perihelion, closest to sun. Around January 3rd each year, Earth is closest to the sun. The sun's tidal force is slightly stronger, about 3 to 4%, than its yearly average. This means spring tides near perihelion are extra high, and neap tides are slightly less neapy. If a big winter storm hits during a perihelion spring tide, coastal flooding can be particularly severe. Aphelion, farthest from sun. Around July 4th, Earth is farthest. The sun's tidal force is weakest. Spring tides near aphelion are slightly less springy than average. The king tide phenomenon. Combine a perigee spring tide, moon closest to Earth and aligned with sun, with perihelion, Earth closest to sun. This stacking of proximity factors creates the highest astronomical tides possible, often called king tides or perigee spring tides. These events offer a dramatic preview of what future sea level rise might routinely bring and are critical for studying coastal vulnerability. News reports of exceptional high tides flooding coastal roads often occur during king tides. The harvest moon effect. Around the autumn equinox, late September in the northern hemisphere, the angle of the ecliptic, the sun's path, means the full moon rises unusually close to sunset for several nights in a row, near the equinox, the harvest moon. While this doesn't directly change the tidal force, it does mean that the highest spring tide high tides associated with that full moon phase occur near sunset or during the evening for several consecutive days. This can increase the perceived impact or duration of high water levels on coasts facing the rising moon, especially if combined with onshore winds common in autumn storms. Here comes the sun's silent role in the long game. The The sun's tidal force, though weaker than the moon's, also contributes to the very long-term gravitational interactions, Earth's rotation, slowdown, the friction caused by solar tides, as well as lunar tides, moving across the ocean floor and continents acts as a minuscule brake on Earth's spin, very gradually lengthening our day. Lunar recession. This braking torque also transfers energy and angular momentum, contributing, along with the dominant lunar tide effect, to the moon's very slow drift away from Earth. So, next time you admire a particularly high tide surging up the beach, or notice the vast expanse of mudflats at low tide, remember the celestial collaboration at work. The moon provides the fundamental rhythm, the twice-daily heartbeat of the ocean, thanks to its privileged position close enough to create a significant gravitational difference across our planet. The sun, the mighty but distant powerhouse, acts as the master modulator. Twice a month, it steps forward and joins forces with the moon, amplifying the highs and lows into spring tides. Twice a month it stands askew, partially countering the moon's pull, leading to the mellower neap tides. It fine-tunes this rhythm with the yearly pulse of Earth's elliptical orbit and combines with the moon's own orbital quirks to produce the spectacular king tides. It's not a competition. It's a harmonious, gravitational partnership. The moon is the lead vocalist, setting the core melody of the tides. The sun is the brilliant backing vocalist and producer, adjusting the volume, adding depth and variation, and ensuring the performance has moments of dramatic intensity and quiet reflection. Together, conducted by the immutable laws of gravity and orbital mechanics, they orchestrate the endless, mesmerizing rise and fall of every ocean on Earth. That gentle lap at your feet? That's the moon's close-up whisper, amplified by the sun's distant roar, echoing across the cosmic stage. Now we've talked about the ocean, but what about the ground we stand on? Does it move too? Absolutely yes. Let's peel back the ocean's surface and dig our toes into something truly mind-bending. The solid ground beneath our feet isn't as immovable as it seems. While we've been mesmerized by the ocean's rhythmic rise and fall, a quieter, subtler dance is happening right under our shoes, our houses, and our cities. Forget the idea of Earth as a rigid billiard ball. Picture it instead as a giant, slightly squishy stress ball, breathing in and out ever so gently in time with the cosmos. Yes, you read that right. The land itself rises and falls in response to the same gravitational tug-of-war between the moon and sun. It's called Earth Tide or solid Earth Tide, and it's the planet's own private yoga session, happening twice a day, completely unnoticed by us bustling humans, but keenly observed by some very sensitive scientific instruments. Buckle up, because we're going underground to explore this hidden pulse of our planet. We think of rock as the ultimate symbol of permanence. Mountains stand for millennia. Continents drift ponderously over eons. But when faced with the persistent rhythmic pull of the moon and sun, even rock reveals a surprising flexibility. Think of it this way. Imagine a giant ball of extremely stiff putty, or perhaps a memory foam mattress the size of a planet. If you push on one side very, very gently but persistently, the entire ball will deform slightly. It will bulge out a little bit towards the push and flatten slightly perpendicular to it. Now, replace your gentle push with the combined gravitational persuasion of the moon and sun. That's essentially what's happening to the Earth. While the Earth's crust and mantle are incredibly rigid compared to water, they are not infinitely stiff. On the scale of the entire planet, subjected to forces acting constantly over thousands of miles, rock does yield elastically. It flexes, It bends. It stretches and compresses, minutely but measurably. The same tidal forces we describe for the oceans, that difference in gravitational pull between the side closest to the moon's sun and the side farthest away, also act on the solid Earth. The rock experiences a stretching force along the line pointing towards the moon's sun and a squishing force perpendicular to it. It's like the planet is getting a very subtle, full-body gravitational massage twice a day. So how much does the ground actually move? We're not talking about earthquakes or landslides here. This is incredibly subtle. The vertical movement, the actual rise and fall of the land surface, is typically on the order of 6 to 12 inches, 15 to 30 centimeters, over the tidal cycle. Horizontally, the stretching and squeezing might shift points on the surface by an inch or two relative to each other. Tiny, right? You'd never notice it walking down the street. Your house doesn't creak with the tide. Trees don't visibly sway to this rhythm. But just because we can't feel it doesn't mean it isn't happening or that we can't measure it. Scientists have developed incredibly precise instruments to detect these minuscule deformations. Strain meters. Imagine a supersensitive ruler buried deep in a borehole or tunnel far from the noisy surface. These instruments measure tiny changes in the distance between two fixed points in the rock. As the earth tide stretches or compresses the crust, the distance between those points changes by microscopic amounts, fractions of the width of a human hair, and the strain meter records it. It's like listening to the Earth's rock groaning softly as it flexes. Tilt meters. These are like ultra-precise levels. Placed on stable bedrock or deep underground, they detect incredibly slight tilting of the ground. As the tidal bulge passes overhead, the ground doesn't just go up and down, it also tilts very slightly towards the bulge. It's like the planet is doing an imperceptible bow to the moon. Tilt meters capture this minute angling. Precise GPS, global positioning system. This is the real game changer. Networks of GPS stations permanently fixed to bedrock constantly chatter with satellites to determine their exact position, latitude, longitude, height, with millimeter precision. Over hours and days, these stations don't stay perfectly still. They trace out a tiny repeating dance, rising as the tidal bulge approaches, sinking as it passes, and moving horizontally as the crust stretches and squeezes. By analyzing data from thousands of these stations worldwide, scientists can map the Earth tide in astonishing detail, seeing the planet deform in near real time. It's like giving the Earth a full-body scan for its cosmic stretches. Gravimeters. These supersensitive instruments measure tiny variations in the strength of gravity at a specific location. As the earth tide lifts the ground beneath the gravimeter upwards, it moves slightly farther from the Earth's center of mass. Since gravity weakens with distance, the gravimeter detects a very slight decrease in gravity during high earth tide. Conversely, when the ground sinks during low earth tide, gravity strengthens minutely. It's an indirect but powerful way to sense the vertical motion. While driven by the same cosmic forces, earth tides and ocean tides are fascinatingly different beasts. The scale of movement. Ocean tides win the visibility contest hands down. Water piles up into bulges tens of feet high in places, racing across continental shelves. Earth tides are the quiet cousin, moving mere inches vertically. Water flows easily, rock resists fiercely, but yields minutely. The timing. Here's a cool twist. Because the solid Earth responds elastically, like a spring, its tidal bulge reaches its peak slightly before the astronomical tide-generating force, moon sun, is directly overhead. It's a tiny lead, but measurable. The ocean, however, is slowed down by friction. the drag of moving across the seafloor, and the inertia of all that water. Its high tide typically lags behind the moon being directly overhead, sometimes by hours, especially in complex coastal areas. So, the solid Earth is actually a fraction ahead of the curve, while the ocean is catching up. The feel. The ocean tide is a dynamic, flowing response. Water physically moves horizontally over vast distances to create the vertical rise at the coast. The earth tide is primarily a deformation. The rock isn't flowing like lava. It's stretching and compressing in place, like a sponge being squeezed and released. The ground beneath you moves up and down and sideways slightly, but the rock mass isn't migrating across the globe like ocean water does. The uniformity. Ocean tides are wildly variable thanks to continents and coastlines. Earth tides are much more predictable and uniform globally. While the exact amplitude can vary slightly depending on the local geology, softer sediments might flex a tiny bit more than hard granite bedrock. The pattern of twice daily rise and fall is consistent everywhere on the planet, even deep inland, far from any ocean. You could be standing in the middle of the Sahara Desert or atop the Himalayas, and the ground beneath you is still performing this subtle cosmic wobble. You might think, okay, cool science, but inches of movement, who cares? Turns out, understanding earth tides is surprisingly important. Calibrating the instruments. For scientists studying truly significant ground movements, like the slow creep before an earthquake, the inflation of a volcano, or the subtle sinking of land due to groundwater extraction, subsidence. Earth tides are background noise. They are a predictable signal that must be subtracted from the data to see the smaller, more important signals they're hunting for. It's like tuning out the hum of your refrigerator to hear a faint whisper. GPS networks used for monitoring tectonic plates or volcanoes have to account for the daily up and down wiggles caused by earth tides to get accurate long-term positions. Understanding the Earth's interior. How much the Earth deforms under the tidal force tells us about the elastic properties of the rocks deep below the surface. It's like poking the planet gently and seeing how it squishes. By comparing the observed deformation to what physics predicts, scientists can infer details about the stiffness, rigidity, and viscosity of the Earth's mantle, even deep into regions we can never directly sample. Earth tides provide a unique probe into our planet's inner structure. Triggering tiny tremors? There's intriguing, though not conclusive, evidence that the added stress from earth tides might act as the final straw, triggering very small earthquakes or volcanic events in regions already critically stressed and ready to go. The tidal stress is tiny compared to tectonic forces, but for a fault or magma chamber on the absolute brink, that extra nudge might be enough to tip it over. It's an area of active research, precision engineering and surveying. For the most ultra-precise engineering projects, think particle accelerators like the Large Hadron Collider or long-term monitoring of massive dams or bridges. Even these tiny ground movements matter. Knowing the predictable pattern of Earth tides allows engineers to factor them in or schedule ultra-precise measurements for times when the tidal deformation is minimal. Oil and gas reservoirs. Deep underground, the pore spaces within rocks holding oil, gas, or water are also subject to these tidal pressures. The slight compression and expansion caused by earth tides can cause tiny, measurable fluctuations in fluid pressure within reservoirs. Monitoring these pressure tides can sometimes provide information about the reservoir's properties and connectivity. If the solid ground moves, what about the air? Absolutely. The atmosphere, that vast ocean of gas above us, also experiences atmospheric tides. The same gravitational tidal forces from the moon and, more significantly, the sun, act on the air. Plus, there's a massive additional driver, the heating of the atmosphere by the sun during the day. The solar heating creates powerful pressure waves that dominate the atmospheric tide. The gravitational pull. Like the ocean and the rock, the atmosphere bulges slightly towards the moon and sun due to gravity. However, air is incredibly light and fluid, and this gravitational effect is very small compared to the heating effect. The solar thermal tide. This is the big one. The sun heats the atmosphere intensely on the day side of the Earth. Hot air expands, creating a zone of higher pressure in the upper atmosphere on the sunlit side. This drives global-scale winds and pressure waves that circle the planet. The main atmospheric tide due to solar heating has a dominant 12-hour cycle, like the lunar ocean tide, and a stronger 24-hour cycle. Why don't we notice? Unlike the ocean sloshing onto the beach, or even the measurable ground movement, atmospheric tides are generally lost in the chaotic churn of weather. The pressure changes they cause are very small compared to the changes brought by high and low pressure weather systems, fronts and storms. You might see a tiny, predictable variation in barometric pressure twice a day if you have a super-sensitive barometer and perfectly calm weather, but it's easily swamped by normal atmospheric noise. However, in the very upper atmosphere, the thermosphere and ionosphere, these tides have more noticeable effects on air density and electrical properties, important for satellite operations and radio communications. Let's wade deeper into the tidal tapestry and discover how this ceaseless sloshing shapes far more than shorelines. It's a powerhouse driving energy, nurturing life, and even subtly rewriting the cosmic clock of our planet. Forget the tide as just a watery metronome. It's Earth's dynamic pulse, a force sculpting ecosystems, offering clean energy, and performing a slow-motion tango with the moon that alters time itself. Buckle up, because we're exploring the profound ripple effects of the ocean's cosmic dance, harnessing the lunar locomotive. Tidal power. Imagine the sheer volume of water the tides move globally, trillions upon trillions of gallons, relentlessly shifting twice a day. That's an enormous amount of mass in motion, carrying colossal kinetic energy. It's like a slow-moving, planet-sized freight train powered entirely by gravity. While we can't tap the open ocean's gentle rise and fall easily, we can capture the focused fury of tidal currents, especially where geography acts like nature's own power amplifier. Narrow straits, swirling around headlands, or surging through constricted channels. Nature's hydraulic press. Picture the tide roaring into a fjord or funnel-shaped estuary. As the channel narrows and shallows, the water accelerates dramatically, like putting your thumb over a garden hose. In places like the Pentland Firth, Scotland, or the Bay of Fundy's Minas Passage, Canada, currents can exceed 11 knots, 20 km/h, powerful enough to challenge large ships and create legendary whirlpools like Corrie Vrecken. This concentrated flow is pure energy waiting to be captured. Think hydropower, but driven by the tide, not a river dam. The most common approach is the tidal barrage. Imagine building a dam across a suitable bay or estuary. This dam has sluice gates to let water flow through, and chambers housing massive underwater turbines like giant slow-turning ship propellers, powering the flood. As the tide rises outside the barrage, the gates open and water rushes into the basin, spinning the turbines to generate electricity. When the tide falls outside, the water trapped inside the basin at high tide is released out through the turbines as the gates open, spinning them again in the opposite direction. It's a two-for-one deal. The Rance tidal power station in France, operational since 1966, is the granddaddy of them all. Its barrage stretches across the Rance River estuary, generating enough predictable power for a small city. It's a testament to the longevity and potential of the technology. Tidal stream turbines. Barrages are big, expensive infrastructure projects that can disrupt local ecosystems. A sleeker, more modular approach is gaining traction. Tidal stream generators. Imagine giant underwater wind turbines anchored to the seabed in areas of strong tidal currents. As the tide floods and ebbs, the flowing water spins the blades, generating electricity directly. Arrays of these turbines can be deployed strategically in tidal hotspots, like channels between islands. Think Orbital Marine Power's floating platforms in Scotland or CIMEC Atlantis' Maygen project in the Pentland Firth. Tidal energy's superpower is predictability. Unlike wind or sunshine, tides are governed by celestial mechanics. We know exactly when the tide will turn and how strong it will be decades, even centuries, in advance. This makes integrating tidal power into the grid easier. However, the technology is capital-intensive, especially barrages. Installing and maintaining massive equipment in harsh, corrosive saltwater environments is tough and expensive. Environmental impacts need careful management. Barrages can alter sedimentation patterns, affect fish migration, and change the delicate salinity balance of estuaries. Tidal stream turbines pose less habitat disruption, but still need careful siting to avoid marine life collisions and underwater noise pollution. The energy density, power per square meter, is also lower than wind, requiring large installations for significant output. Despite challenges, the potential is immense. As technology advances, tougher materials, smarter turbine designs, better installation methods, and costs decrease, tidal energy could become a significant player in the renewable energy mix for coastal nations. It's a way to literally plug into the gravitational energy of the Moon-Sun-Earth system. Imagine coastal communities powered by the reliable rhythm of the ocean flowing past their shores. The intertidal realm, nature's busiest bakery. While engineers dream of capturing tidal energy, the daily flood and retreat of the tides create something arguably more vital: the intertidal zone. This dynamic strip of land, exposed at low tide, submerged at high tide, isn't just a soggy border. It's one of Earth's most productive, diverse, and fascinating ecosystems. Think of it as nature's ultimate pressure cooker and nursery, perfectly timed by the cosmic clock. Life here is defined by extremes. Twice a day, organisms face radical shifts, submerged in cool seawater, then exposed to blazing sun, drying winds, or freezing cold. Bathed in nutrient-rich water teeming with plankton, then stranded, relying on stored reserves or scavenging. Hidden from land predators underwater, then exposed to birds, mammals, and us at low tide. Architects of the edge. Different zones emerge based on how long they're submerged. The splash zone, high dry. Only splashed by waves at high tide. Tough cookies like lichens and periwinkles live here, enduring long dry spells. The high intertidal, covered only at peak high tides, home to barnacles, glued shut when dry. Mussels, clamped tight in clusters, and hardy algae. The mid-intertidal, covered and uncovered roughly equally, bustling with sea stars, anemones, crabs, like the speedy hermit crab and the camouflaged shore crab, various snails, and dense kelp forests in cooler waters. The low intertidal, mostly submerged, exposed only briefly at low tide. A kaleidoscope of sea urchins, colorful sea slugs, nudibranchs, small fish, sponges, sea cucumbers, and lush seaweed gardens. Survival here demands ingenuity. The clamp down. Muscles secrete super-strong threads. Barnacles cement themselves shut. Limpets suction down with incredible force. The great escape. Crabs and snails scuttle under rocks or seaweed. Worms burrow deep into mud or sand. The water bearers. Some snails trap water under their shells. Anemones retract into moist blobs. Algae simply tolerate drying out, rehydrating when the tide returns. Time to perfection. Reproduction is often synchronized with tides. Grunion fish famously ride high tides onto California beaches to lay eggs in the sand just above the waterline, ensuring the next high tide washes the hatchlings out to sea. Many marine larvae release on spring tides for maximum dispersal. The ecosystem engine. Why is this zone so crucial? Nutrient superhighway. The tide constantly flushes the zone, bringing fresh plankton and oxygen and carrying away waste. Decaying seaweed and detritus feed bacteria, which feed tiny crustaceans, which feed fish and birds. It's a recycling powerhouse. Nursery of the sea. The complex structure, rocks, reefs, eelgrass, mangrove roots, provides perfect hiding places for juvenile fish, crabs, and shrimp. Vast mudflats exposed at low tide are rich in organic muck, feeding armies of clams, worms, and shrimp, which in turn feed migrating shorebirds like sandpipers and plovers who fly thousands of miles to feast here. Salt marshes and mangrove swamps in tropical zones act as immense filters, trapping pollutants, buffering coastlines from storms, and providing critical nurseries. Over 75% of commercially caught fish species spend part of their life cycle in these tidal nurseries. The bird buffet. For migratory birds, intertidal zones are essential pit stops and wintering grounds. The predictable exposure of vast mudflats at low tide provides an all-you-can-eat buffet of invertebrates, fueling epic journeys across hemispheres. Lose these tidal wetlands, and you lose critical links in global bird migration routes. A delicate dance, this incredible productivity comes with vulnerability. Pollution, oil spills, chemicals, plastics, concentrates here. Coastal development destroys habitats. Rising sea levels threaten to drown marshes faster than they can migrate inland. Overharvesting shellfish disrupts the food web. Protecting these tidal nurseries isn't just about saving cute crabs. It's about safeguarding the foundation of coastal ocean life and the livelihoods that depend on it. The cosmic break. Slowing Earth. Pushing Moon away now. Let's zoom out to a timescale almost too vast to comprehend. The tides are doing something extraordinary. They are very, very slowly putting the brakes on Earth's rotation and pushing the Moon away. It's a gravitational feedback loop playing out over billions of years. The friction factor. Remember those massive tidal currents surging across continental shelves, especially in shallow seas? All that water moving over the seabed creates friction. Think of it like dragging a giant, heavy rug across a rough floor. It takes energy and generates heat. This tidal friction acts like a continuous, gentle brake on the Earth's spin. Energy transfer. The cosmic ledger. Energy can't vanish. The rotational energy lost by the Earth due to this tidal friction doesn't just disappear as heat. It has to go somewhere. According to the laws of physics, specifically conservation of angular momentum, this energy is transferred to the Moon's orbital motion, pushing the Moon out. Adding energy to the Moon's orbit has a specific effect. It causes the Moon to spiral outwards, away from Earth. Why? In a gravitational system, adding energy to an orbit makes it larger and slower. It's like gently pushing a child on a swing higher and higher. Each push adds energy, making the swing arc wider, a larger orbit, but also making each swing take slightly longer. The measurable drift. Precise laser measurements bouncing off reflectors left on the moon by Apollo astronauts confirm this. The moon is receding from Earth at about 1.5 inches, 3.8 centimeters per year. That seems tiny, but it's relentless. Over a human lifetime, it's only a few feet. Over millions of years, it adds up significantly. Earth's slowing spin. As the moon gains orbital energy and moves away, the Earth loses rotational energy. Our planet's spin is slowing down, making the day longer. The rate, about 1.7 milliseconds per century. Again, tiny per year. You'd need a super accurate atomic clock to notice, but monumental over geological time. Rewind the clock billions of years. When the moon was much closer, perhaps only 15,000, 20,000 miles away compared to 240,000 today, the tidal forces were immense. Days were dramatically shorter, perhaps only 5 or 6 hours long. Earth was spinning like a frenetic top. Tidal ranges weren't measured in feet. They were measured in hundreds, even thousands of feet. Imagine continental shelves repeatedly drowned under colossal walls of water twice a day. The energy dissipation from these megatides accelerated the braking effect. Intense heating. The friction from these gargantuan tides also generated significant heat within the Earth's interior and oceans, potentially influencing early geological activity and the planet's thermal evolution. The distant future. A slower, lonelier. Waltz. Fast forward billions of years. As the moon continues its outward drift, Earth's rotation will keep slowing. Days will gradually lengthen. The moon's tidal pull weakens with distance. Future tides will be significantly smaller than today's. In an extremely distant future scenario, Earth's rotation could slow enough to become tidally locked with the moon, meaning one side of Earth would permanently face the moon, like the moon already does with Earth. However, the sun will likely expand into a red giant and engulf both Earth and moon long before this could realistically happen. A dance preserved in rock. This tidal braking effect isn't just theory. It's recorded in Earth's geology. Studying growth patterns in ancient fossil corals, which lay down daily and yearly growth bands, and certain sedimentary rocks reveals that days were indeed shorter, and there were more days per year hundreds of millions of years ago, confirming the long-term slowdown. So the next time you stand on a beach, watching the tide roll in or out, see beyond the water. See the potential energy surging through narrow straits, energy we're learning to harness. See the vibrant nursery being exposed or submerged, a bustling, vital ecosystem tuned perfectly to the cosmic rhythm. Feel the ancient friction, the gentle, persistent drag of water on rock that's ever so slightly slowing our planet's spin. And look up at the moon, knowing its gentle glow belies an immense gravitational embrace that not only moves our oceans, but is also, inch by inch, year by year, pushing it further into the cosmic dark while lengthening our days. The tide is more than water rising and falling. It's the heartbeat of our coastlines, a predictable renewable battery, the architect of rich ecosystems, and the silent choreographer of a slow celestial ballet between Earth and its lunar companion. It's a force that shapes life, land, and time itself, a daily reminder that we live on a dynamic planet, intimately connected to the cosmos. From the scuttling crab on the mudflat to the laser beam bouncing off the moon, the influence of the tide truly is a profound and beautiful ripple across our world. Let's pull back the curtain on the high-tech wizardry behind predicting that seemingly simple rise and fall of the sea. Forget crystal balls or lunar guesswork. Modern tide forecasting is a breathtaking blend of celestial mechanics, supercomputers, real-world data, and a deep understanding of our planet's watery, rocky skin. It's less about reading the moon's mind and more about conducting a planetary orchestra where gravity, geography, ocean depth, Earth's spin, and even the weather are all playing complex, interwoven solos. Buckle up. We're diving into the fascinating, often messy world of turning cosmic forces into your local tide chart. Imagine the tide-generating forces as a complex, ever-changing gravitational soundtrack composed by the moon and sun. Predicting tides starts with decoding this celestial score with extreme precision. Lunar librations, solar shenanigans. It's not enough to know the moon is up. Models need the exact distance to the moon, which varies by 30,000 miles between perigee and apogee. Its precise declination, how far north or south it is relative to Earth's equator, and its orbital phase. The Sun gets similar scrutiny. Distance, varying by 3 million miles between perihelion and aphelion, declination, and its position relative to the moon. Why such precision? A closer moon exerts a much stronger tidal pull. A moon high over the equator creates different tidal patterns than one skimming the poles. This astronomical ballet is calculated decades in advance using ephemerides, ultra-precise tables of celestial positions. Think of it as having the sheet music for the gravitational concerto years before the performance. The shape of the stage, bathymetry coastline, geometry, the amplifiers and distorters. Here's where the simple two bulges model hits the rocky, complex reality of Earth. Bathymetry, the ocean's topography. Picture the deep ocean floor like a rugged mountain range inverted underwater. Trenches plunge miles deep, seamounts rise abruptly, and vast abyssal plains stretch out. But for tides, the continental shelves are the real game changers. These shallow, gently sloping platforms surrounding continents act like giant amplifiers. As the deep ocean tidal wave, only a foot or two high, encounters this shallowing slope, it slows down dramatically. Physics dictates slow the wave, and it must grow taller to conserve energy. It's like an ocean wave rearing up as it nears the beach, but on a continental scale. A wide, shallow shelf, like the east coast of the USA or the North Sea, means massive amplification. A narrow, steep shelf, like much of the Pacific coast, means less dramatic tides. Deep ocean basins can also resonate at specific frequencies, subtly reinforcing or damping certain tidal components. Models need incredibly detailed 3D maps of the entire ocean floor, down to individual seamounts and canyons, to simulate how the tide wave bends, speeds up, slows down, and changes height as it traverses this underwater terrain. Coastline geometry, nature's obstacle course. Now imagine that amplified tidal wave reaching the shoreline. Does it hit a straight, sandy beach, a narrow fjord, a sprawling estuary like the Chesapeake Bay, a maze of islands like the Indonesian archipelago? Each coastline acts like a unique set of baffles, funnels, and reflectors. Funnels. Bays like the Ying Bay of Fundy, or the Bristol Channel. Squeeze the incoming tide like toothpaste from a tube, forcing water higher and higher. Models must precisely map the narrowing width and shallowing depth every few hundred meters to predict the insane 50-foot range. Resonators. Some bays have a natural slosh period matching the tidal rhythm. Fundy is a prime example. Its length and depth mean the water sloshes back and forth like wine in a glass, rocked at just the right speed, amplifying the tide far beyond simple funneling.
get the bathymetry wrong by a few meters, and the resonance prediction fails.
The island's headlands. These scatter the tidal wave, creating eddies, accelerating currents around points, and causing complex interference patterns. The tide might arrive hours apart on different sides of a large island. Nantucket Sound is famous for having drastically different tides just miles apart due to blocking and channeling by islands. Estuaries, rivers. Tides don't stop at the coast. They push saltwater miles up rivers, the tidal Thames, the Hudson, the Amazon's Pororoca Bore. Models must account for river flow fighting the incoming tide, the shape of the river channel, and how friction slows the tidal pulse upstream. Predicting the height and timing of high tide 50 miles inland is a whole different beast. The spin doctor, Coriolis effect. Earth's rotation throws a major curveball, literally. The Coriolis effect. Deflecting moving objects right in the northern hemisphere, left in the south, profoundly shapes tides in large basins. Amphidromic systems, the tidal whirlpools. In the open ocean or wide continental shelves, the Coriolis effect prevents the tide from being a simple in and out at the coast. Instead, it creates rotating tidal systems called amphidromic systems. Picture a giant, slow-motion whirlpool. At the center, the amphidromic point, there's virtually no vertical tide. But as you spiral outward, the tidal range increases, and the time of high tide progresses around the point. The North Sea has a major amphidromic point off Norway. The Gulf of Mexico has one. Models must solve complex equations to map these rotating tidal waves, dictating that high tide sweeps around the basin like the hand of a clock, not arriving uniformly everywhere at once. Ignore Coriolis, and your tide times for Miami would be disastrously wrong compared to New Orleans. All that water surging across the seabed isn't frictionless. Dragging trillions of tons of water over mud, sand, rock, and through narrow straits saps energy and slows the tidal wave down. The lag factor. This friction is why high tide usually occurs hours after the moon passes overhead, the lunar transit. The shallower and rougher the seabed, like over a sandy continental shelf, the greater the lag. Models incorporate complex friction coefficients based on seabed type and depth. In shallow, muddy estuaries, friction can dramatically reduce the tidal range compared to the open coast just outside. Taming the torrent. In places with ferocious tidal currents, like the Kiyomiwak Pentland Firth, or Diom, Naruto Strait as whirlpools, friction generates turbulence and heat, limiting just how fast the water can flow and how high the tide can pile up. Models simulate this drag to predict current speeds vital for shipping and tidal energy. The wild card, weather the unruly guest. Just when you think you've modeled everything, the atmosphere crashes the party. Storm surge, the tidal hijacker. Low atmospheric pressure, like in a hurricane or intense winter storm, literally allows the sea surface to rise about 1 centimeter per millibar drop in pressure. Far worse are winds. Strong, persistent onshore winds can physically pile water against the coast, acting like a giant invisible bulldozer. When a storm surge coincides with a high astronomical tide, especially a spring or king tide, the results can be catastrophic. Hurricane Katrina's devastating flooding in New Orleans was a horrific example of a massive storm surge riding on top of a high tide. Models incorporate real-time and forecast atmospheric pressure and wind data to predict these surges, which can add feet to the predicted tide height. The opposite effect. Strong offshore winds can actually push water away from the coast, making low tides lower than predicted. A persistent high-pressure system can slightly depress sea levels. Waves on top of tides. While not changing the mean water level like surge, giant storm waves crashing ashore during high tide cause significantly more erosion and flooding than the same waves at low tide. Coastal models often combine tide and wave forecasts. So, how do oceanographers possibly juggle all this? The power of supercomputers. Modern tidal models are massive computer programs running on supercomputers. They divide the entire global ocean and adjacent seas into a 3D grid, sometimes with cells only a few hundred meters wide in complex coastal areas. At each grid cell, the model solves complex hydrodynamic equations that account for the astronomical tide-generating forces, the depth, bathymetry, the shape of the boundaries, coastlines, the Coriolis effect, friction with the seabed, and internal friction, viscosity, inputs from atmospheric models for weather effects, harmonic analysis, the tide's secret code. While the physics-based models are powerful, the most accurate predictions for specific locations rely heavily on her harmonic analysis. Here's the clever part. The complex tidal pattern at any spot can be mathematically broken down into a sum of many simple sine waves, each representing a distinct tidal constituent. Each constituent corresponds to a specific astronomical influence. E2, the principal lunar semi-diurnal constituent, 12.42-hour period to main twice daily tide. S2, the principal solar semi-diurnal constituent, 12.00-hour period. N2, the larger lunar elliptical constituent, accounts for moon's changing distance. 1, the lunisolar diurnal constituent, about 23.93 hours. O1, the principal lunar diurnal constituent, 25.82 hours. And dozens more, M4, M6, S4, MSF, M1M, each accounting for smaller nuances like the moon's declination, the sun's distance, and interactions between different frequencies. The role of tide gauges, calibrating the model. This is where decades of boots on the ground or peers in the water data come in. Tide gauges, sensors meticulously measuring sea level height, minute by minute, year after year, are the ground truth. Oceanographers take years of gauge data from a specific port, say New York Harbor, and perform harmonic analysis on it. This reveals the exact amplitude, height, and phase, timing of each tidal constituent for that exact location. These unique local tidal fingerprints are then plugged into the broader physics-based models or used directly to generate tide predictions using harmonic constants. It's like tuning the cosmic orchestra for each individual concert hall, harbor. For the most accurate forecasts, especially when weather is a factor, models use data assimilation. Real-time data from tide gauges, satellite altimeters, measuring sea surface height from space, and buoy networks are continuously fed into the running model. The model adjusts its predictions on the fly based on what's actually happening right now. It's like a GPS recalculating your route when you miss a turn. All this staggering complexity boils down to the tide table you check on your phone before a beach walk or fishing trip. This predictability is vital. Safe navigation. A ship captain entering a port like Liverpool, with its huge tidal range, must know the exact depth at high tide to clear sandbars. Grounding at low tide is expensive and dangerous. Tidal currents dictate safe passage times through straits like the Strait of Messina or around capes. Coastal engineering. Building a bridge, a seawall, or an offshore wind farm, you need to know the highest possible water level including storm surge on a king tide, and the strongest currents it must withstand. Fishing aquaculture. Many fish species feed most actively on certain tides. Shellfish farmers need to access their beds at low tide, knowing the tide is crucial for livelihoods. Search and rescue disaster planning. Predicting coastal flooding from storm surges relies on accurate tidal baselines. Knowing when low tide will expose vast areas helps plan searches. Surfing recreation. Surfers chase the tide push for the best waves. Kayakers plan trips around slack water, the brief pause between ebb and flood currents. Beachcombers time their walks for the lowest tides. Ecosystem management. Understanding tidal inundation patterns is essential for protecting salt marshes, mangroves, and mudflats. However, tide prediction isn't a solved problem. Scientists are constantly improving bathymetric maps, especially in remote areas, deploying more sophisticated tide gauges and current meters, developing higher resolution models that can simulate smaller bays and estuaries, better integrating weather and wave models, studying the effects of climate change. Rising sea levels alter bathymetry and resonance. So next time you glance at a tide chart or an app, marvel at what it represents. It's not astrology, it's the culmination of centuries of observation, groundbreaking physics, mind-bending mathematics, relentless data collection, and immense computational power. It's the translation of the gravitational whispers of the moon and sun, filtered through the deep valleys and shallow shelves of the ocean floor, twisted by Earth's spin, squeezed through the rocky contours of continents, battered by winds, and finally calibrated by decades of measurements at a specific dock or buoy. It's science wrestling with the beautiful, chaotic complexity of our planet to tell you, with remarkable accuracy, whether you'll need boots or a boat at the beach tomorrow afternoon. That humble tide prediction is a testament to human ingenuity, decoding the rhythm of the cosmos to navigate the very edge of our dynamic, watery world. Now, that's something worth checking your app for. The genius of the tidal force is that it explains why we get 2 high tides per day, as Earth rotates through both bulges, and why the moon, despite being puny compared to the sun, reigns supreme over our tides, because it's close, so the difference in its pull across Earth is greater. It explains why astronauts in orbit are weightless, but the oceans aren't flung off the Earth. The average pull keeps things together. The differential pull just rearranges the water. It explains why lakes and even your cup of coffee doesn't have noticeable tides. They're too small. The difference in the moon's pull from one side to the other is utterly minuscule, overwhelmed by other forces like wind or just surface tension. It's all about the scale of the object relative to the distance to the gravitational source and the difference that distance creates. So, the next time you marvel at the tide rolling in, remember it's not just a simple moon pulls water story. It's a delicate cosmic balancing act. It's the result of millions of tiny gravitational whispers, loudest where the moon is closest, faintest where it's farthest, combined with the gentle outward push of our orbital waltz. The rigid Earth endures a subtle stretch, while the free-flowing ocean joyfully piles up in 2 places, one reaching towards its celestial partner, the other stretching away in the freedom of the dance. That's the tidal force in action. The quiet, persistent, distance-dependent sculptor of our shorelines, driven by the invisible hand of gravity, playing a slightly stronger tune on one side of our planet than the other. It's a fundamental universal process, turning the vast ocean into a responsive partner in the Earth and Moon's eternal gravitational embrace. And it all hinges on that simple, profound truth. Gravity weakens with distance, and that tiny variation makes all the difference in our watery world. And so, the tide turns, the ocean settles, the moon keeps watch. Wherever you drift tonight, may these quiet rhythms carry you into deep, restoring peace. If this space soothes your soul, subscribe to Hafee Sleep. Together, we'll wander more gentle worlds. Tap the like button if the tides washed stillness over you, and whisper below your comfy location. Let's see how far this calm has traveled. Until next time, breathe slowly, let go, and know the universe holds you softly. Good night, dreamers.